Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about navigating the difficult relationship. From simple disagreements to emotionally abusive behaviors, you deserve respect and kindness. All the information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Love and Abuse. Today I'm going to actually address a review that I received because it said the last episode rubbed them the wrong way. They didn't mention the episode title, so I'm not sure which one it is, but they said that they're in an emotionally and verbally abusive relationship. They go on to say, I was always apologizing for years and begging for forgiveness. I've been in therapy and have started standing up for myself. I don't grovel, apologize, or beg. I now tell him he's in the wrong when he's abusive and point out when he needs to change. The episode that they're referring to basically says that a victim will never blame the abuser, and I think that is skewed and can lead to confusion. A victim can be assertive. They can know it's not them. They can call the abuser out for their behavior and still be the victim. At some point, you realize that it's the abuser's responsibility to get help and change, and then you stop fawning. It is the abuser who is causing the relationship problems. And I don't mean normal grievances, of course, but the abuse cycle. Can you clarify this to your audience? So this way, if someone hears a victim, quote, blaming the abuser, they don't start to think that the victim is actually the abuser. It is really hard to clarify, as I'm sure my significant other plays victim to his group of friends as well. All right, thank you for writing that. And it is a great point to talk about today. And yes, you're absolutely right. There's a point where the victim no longer takes responsibility for the abuser's behavior. I mean, I would hope that the victim of abuse, and I'm going to use the terms victim and abuser for brevity. I don't mean to label anyone anything, but it's just easier to say victim and abuser in this case. So yes, the person who wrote, you're right. There's a point where the victim should no longer take responsibility. I mean, they should never take responsibility for the abuser's behavior. They get to a point where they realize that the problem is the abuser, not themselves. That's when they finally see what's happening. And at that point, they can finally move forward, whether they stay in the relationship or leave it. They finally see the truth through their own eyes instead of seeing through the eyes of the person that's trying to change or control them. Now, I usually say that the victim will never blame the abuser when the victim can't figure out if they're abusive or not. And that's for people who've written to me. I've had a lot of people reach out and they ask me the question, how do I know if I'm the abuser or not? And typically the answer is if you take responsibility for everything going wrong in the relationship, then you're not the abusive person. In other words, are you pointing the finger at yourself, believing you are the problem? Or do you ever point the finger at them knowing that they are? Like this person who wrote. They know that their partner is the problem. And so now they're standing up for themselves. In my experience, victims almost always take the blame. They believe the manipulations of the emotional abuser, and they believe that they themselves must not be doing things right, or maybe they're messing up, so they try to do better. The emotional abuser wants the victim to keep the focus on themselves so that they, the abuser, will be able to get away with anything they're doing. That's like having a spotlight. They want to put the spotlight on their victim so the abuser can get away with pretty much anything. And that's why the victims often take the blame for everything that's going wrong in the relationship. But when the victim finally realizes that the other person is actually trying to control and manipulate them, that's the enlightening moment. That's usually when everything changes. The person who wrote that message is a perfect example of this, of someone who figured it out. They went to therapy and they learned that they are being emotionally abused. And that discovery empowered them to stand up for themselves and point out when the abuse is happening. They were able to put the spotlight back on the person who really needs to look at themselves and reflect on their behaviors and maybe even get help so that they stop those behaviors and heal what needs healing in them. So back to the person who wrote, you're right. A victim can be assertive. they can know it's not them, and they can call the abuser out for their behavior. And when that happens, the victim has reached what I might call enlightenment about their relationship challenges, and they can now speak up confidently, knowing they are right. And I appreciate you pointing this out. You are right. You can still be the victim while standing up for yourself. If someone burns your arm with fire and you wrap up your arm with fireproof clothing and then they try to burn your arm again, they are still the perpetrator and you are still the victim of their behavior. The difference, however, is that you're now a victim with resources. You now know that you need to protect yourself from that person because they aren't stopping their bad behavior. And it's at this point where you are an empowered victim. I really don't like using that term victim because once you're empowered, there should be a transition. I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but it's at this point where you become an empowered victim that I believe you are choosing to no longer be the victim. In fact, I think this is the point of transition. Yes, you're still subject to the bad behaviors and you still have to deal with those behaviors, especially from a PTSD standpoint where it's been going on for so long and you still have your own feelings that come up and you're still triggered, and all this is happening while you're trying to rebuild yourself and they're continuing to tear you down. But realizing that you're the victim and now becoming assertive and standing up for yourself, becoming empowered, you finally have one foot going in the right direction while the other foot is doing its best to keep you balanced. The trick is to keep moving that one foot in the right direction so that not only can you move toward freedom from abuse, but also to show the other person that you're no longer going to play their game. Now, this doesn't work for everyone. One of the main points I make at the beginning of every episode is to pick your battles wisely. Some people may want to stand up and speak up, calling the abusive person out, but that can also be dangerous with certain people. So you really have to know yourself well enough to know what you can and may not be able to handle. And you also have to know what the other person is capable of so that you don't get into a dangerous situation. There is a transition point for victims, and normally what I see is that the victim reaches what I call their threshold. That's the point where they figure everything out, just like this person did, and they tell the abusive person, you better stop or else. And that or else has a different meaning to different people, but they mean it when they say it. Typically, the threshold is when the victim has had enough and they refuse to take any more. It's also a point that if the abuser doesn't make changes, the victim makes the changes for them and for themselves. Maybe that means consequences for the behaviors, or maybe it means leaving. It could mean emotionally distancing themselves from the other person, or even physically distancing themselves from that person, at least for a while. The threshold that the victim reaches is usually the biggest wake-up call to the abuser. It's do or die, and they better do, or what they want in their life will fizzle out and disappear. And back to the original point that this person made, they're basically saying you can still be a victim and still stand up for yourself. Thank you for pointing that out. I agree. And my one suggestion, when you reach that point where you are what I might call an empowered victim, is to let that be your transition point from empowered victim to empowered person. And I'm not saying victim aren't people. I'm just putting that in a different way. Being the victim, again, I don't like that word, but sometimes there are real victims. You are probably a real victim to what's going on in your relationship or a relationship in your life. But I want you to make the feeling of victim be a transitional feeling. It's something that you're moving away from and toward empowerment, so that whoever is trying to control or change you knows that without a doubt, their behavior will cause you to distance yourself so far from them that they have no choice but to finally end up putting that spotlight on themselves. They need to take steps to heal and change so that they are no longer relying on abusive behavior to get their selfish needs met. And they should be supporting those they care about to be themselves. In other words, honor someone honoring themselves. Support that person in their individuality, in their autonomy, in their ability to make decisions for their own life. The person who wants to control or change someone needs to put the spotlight back on themselves and say, I need to support that person for who they are. That's the key to stopping emotionally abusive behavior. Just let the person you say you love be themselves. If the abusive person just simply followed that logic, they would stop pushing people away. And if they really don't like who you are when you're being yourself, then quite honestly, they need to figure out what they want to do with their lives. I ask emotionally abusive people all the time, why try to control or change someone you say you care about if it only drives them farther away from you? If you are doing behaviors that drive people away, but you want to keep them in your life, where's the logic? It doesn't make any sense. In the Healed Being program I run for emotionally abusive people who want to heal and change, I remind them when you support someone being themselves, they almost always feel closer to you. The reason is because you're showing them that no matter how they show up, they matter. They're lovable. Emotional abuse is like telling someone that you're not good enough and you aren't worth loving. That's painful as hell. And believe it or not, almost every emotionally abusive person I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot, probably thousands now, they actually really love the people they're hurting. Maybe a toxic love. They're not loving in the most healthy way. And I know it sounds strange for some people listening right now, but most emotionally abusive people don't want to be vulnerable. They don't want what they are insecure about to manifest. And if someone has a fear of being alone, for example, they'll do controlling things to make sure that the person that they're with never leaves them. They are quite literally creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of being alone. Because doing hurtful behaviors to someone who you don't want leaving will make them leave. No one wants to stay in a controlling relationship. Most people don't want to be controlled or told how to live their life. So trying to control or change a person will only make them feel less connected, less loving, more emotionally distant as they try to figure out how to navigate the problems in the relationship. Most emotionally abusive people would be so afraid of their insecurities manifesting that they cause harm just to make sure it never happens. And I know that doesn't make sense to everyone listening right now, but it's all part of their illogical behavior. But logic doesn't play a role in emotional abuse. The hurtful, controlling behaviors are almost always their way of protecting themselves from harm. And usually it's because they have a fear of exposing their deepest vulnerabilities and insecurities. That's no excuse for what they do, but it might give you some insight. In fact, to the person who wrote, since you're already comfortable calling them out and standing up for yourself, let me give you one more question to ask during those moments. The question is, what are you so afraid of happening if this doesn't go the way you want it to? Use that question or some variation of that, and it might lead to a deeper conversation. Or you might say, I'm not afraid. In which case you might follow up with another question. Let me give you another one. Then why are you acting this way? Why are you trying to control the outcome so fiercely? And I guess you could ask him another question. What do you want to happen by acting this way? Why do you want that to happen? When he answers, why do you want that to happen? Those questions could lead to a deeper conversation, like I said, or they could go down a rabbit hole of his choosing with no real end in sight. It just depends on his ability to listen and process and want to make the relationship better and will be a responsible party in doing that. Responsible as in taking responsibility for his own behaviors, his own words, his own contribution to the problems in the relationship. But let me again repeat, most emotionally abusive people have a lot of insecurities, and most of them act out of fear. And I'm not saying that it works that way for everyone. Not all abusive people act out of fear. Some are just jerks. Some are selfish and they don't care about you. They don't have access to empathy, and they're just trying to get their wants and needs met, and they don't care who they steamroll along the way. But remember, in many, many cases, abusive people are afraid of an outcome they don't want. And because of that, they may fight to make the outcome they do want happen. They want what they want to happen. And often the closest people in their life are treated as obstacles instead of allies. I hope I gave you something to think about. I really hope you got something that helps to empower you to keep moving toward a better space inside yourself, somewhere where you feel more comfortable being yourself, because in almost every case of an abusive relationship, you can't be yourself. And I don't want you to lose that. It's still in there. That person is still in there. And I just want to make sure you remember that, you know that, and you deserve to be that, and you deserve love and kindness and respect and support for that person you really are. And other people's insecurities shouldn't lessen that. It shouldn't decrease that amount of love or support or kindness and respect. If they have issues, they need to deal with those issues. They need to work on those issues. But never see yourself as any less just because somebody is incapable of treating you with the love and respect you deserve. I want to thank the person who wrote in. Thank you for that feedback. It was an important perspective. I'm so glad you brought it up. Stay strong and share this with others who might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. The workbook helps you pinpoint exactly what's going on in your relationship, outlining behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad. Take the assessment and gain clarity on what your next best steps are. After you purchase the workbook, you'll get an invite to the private peer support group. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. If you've discovered that you are doing the hurtful behaviors to someone you care about and you would like to change that about yourself, sign up for the Healed Being program over at healedbeing.com. You can take the course on your own, at your own pace, or join the optional private online group where I and others will give you direct support. It's time to stop making those you love feel bad. That's healedbeing.com. And if you're looking for a safer way to listen to this show where all the titles to the episodes are changed, click on the Safe Listening button on the podcast page over at loveandabuse.com. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant, because you are. We'll talk again soon.